I'm a freelance photographer, which means I spend a lot of time on the road, chasing landscapes and unique locations for my clients. This time, I had taken on a project that required me to travel across multiple states, capturing images of remote highways, forgotten roadside attractions, and eerie small towns. I had been driving all day, my back aching from the long hours behind the wheel, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, exhaustion started creeping in. I wasn't near any major towns, and I didn't want to risk falling asleep at the wheel. So when I saw a lone rest stop sign glowing in the darkness, I decided to pull over for a quick break. The rest stop was nothing more than a small parking lot, a single streetlight flickering overhead, and a dingy-looking brick building that housed the bathrooms and vending machines. My car was the only one there. At least, that's what I thought at first. As I pulled into a space near the entrance, I noticed an old, beat-up RV parked on the far side of the lot. Its windows were dark, no sign of movement inside. Either way, I brushed it off and got out of the car, stretching my stiff limbs before heading toward the restroom. The air was crisp and silent. I hurried inside, quickly washing my face and splashing cold water on my skin to wake myself up. As I exited, I instinctively glanced toward my car, and my stomach dropped. My back door was open, just slightly, maybe an inch. I froze in place, my pulse hammering in my ears. Had I forgotten to close it? I was sure I had locked the car before heading inside. I walked toward the car, trying to stay calm. I grabbed the handle and yanked the door open, my breath catching as I peered inside. The seats were empty. The trunk space was untouched. Nothing looked out of place, yet something felt terribly wrong. I quickly shut the door, locked the car again, and slid into the driver's seat, locking everything behind me. My fingers fumbled to start the engine, and as I glanced up at the rearview mirror, the door of the old RV was now slightly ajar. Someone had been inside it. I sat frozen in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The RV's door had been shut just moments ago. Now it hung open slightly, revealing nothing but pitch-black darkness inside. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scanned the lot. No movement, no sound, just the eerie flickering of the lone streetlight overhead. I knew I had to leave, right now. I reached for the gear shift, my hands trembling as I put the car in reverse. But just as I was about to press the gas, something moved. A figure stepped out from the RV. He was tall, unnaturally thin, wearing an oversized hoodie with the hood pulled up, obscuring most of his face. But what I could see made my stomach churn. His mouth was stretched into an eerie grin, and his head tilted slightly to the side, as if he was studying me. Then he took a step forward. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to drive. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires screeching against the pavement as I backed out of the parking spot. But just as I turned the wheel to leave, something else happened that made my blood run cold. The passenger door handle jiggled. I whipped my head to the side, and through the foggy window, I saw another figure, a second person, hunched low, their hand gripping the handle, trying to open my door. Their face was barely visible, but I could see wide, dark eyes staring straight at me. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I floored it. The car jerked forward, my tires skidding against the asphalt as I sped toward the exit. In my side mirror, I saw the first figure still standing there, unmoving, just watching me. The second figure had vanished, but I didn't care where they had gone. I just needed to get out of there. My heart pounded as I finally merged onto the highway, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. My mind raced with thoughts. Who were they? What did they want? Had they been inside my car when I was in the restroom? I drove for miles, my paranoia growing with each passing minute. Every shadow on the road looked like a figure. Every car that passed made me flinch. I kept glancing at my back seat, half expecting to see someone crouching there. Finally, I reached a well-lit gas station and pulled in, my body still trembling. I needed to breathe, to process what had just happened. As I sat there trying to calm down, my phone buzzed with a notification. I looked down at the screen. A single image had been airdropped to me. My blood turned to ice. It was a photo of me, standing at the sink in the rest stop bathroom, my back turned to the camera. Someone had been inside with me, and I had never even noticed. I never stopped at a rest stop alone again. Before the next scary story, if you're enjoying this, hit subscribe and like to help us reach 1K loyal community. Got suggestions? Drop them in the comments. And don't forget to share the scares with friends and family. I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, close enough to civilization, but still far enough away that my nights are quiet. It had been snowing all evening, a thick blanket of white covering the streets and yards. My wife was away on a work trip, and I had been looking forward to a peaceful night by myself. I made some coffee, wrapped myself in a warm blanket, and settled in to watch a movie. Outside, the snow kept falling, muting the world in its eerie, peaceful silence. Then, at exactly 11:17 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't ordered food, and my nearest neighbor lived nearly half a mile away. The knock wasn't frantic, just two slow, deliberate raps against the wood. I froze, my mind racing. Maybe it was someone in trouble? A stranded driver? I hesitated before getting up, my breath coming out in a visible puff as I neared the door. Peering through the peephole, my stomach twisted. A man stood at the edge of my porch. He wasn't shivering, despite the snow collecting on his shoulders. He wore a dark winter coat, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. And he was smiling, not a friendly smile, not a nervous one. A wide, unblinking, too perfect grin. I hesitated, something deep inside me warning not to open the door. Instead, I called out through the wood, "Can I help you?" The man didn't answer right away. He just stood there, smiling. Then, after an uncomfortably long pause, he finally spoke. "It's really cold out here. Mind if I come in?" His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed, as if he had practiced saying those words over and over. I swallowed hard, gripping the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me not to let him in. "Sorry," I said, keeping my voice firm. "I can't do that, but if you need help, I can call someone for you." The man's smile didn't waver. If anything, it widened. "That's all right," he said. "I just wanted to see if you'd open the door." A chill ran through me, and not from the cold. Before I could say anything, the man turned and walked away. I watched through the peephole as he stepped off my porch, heading toward the street. The snow was fresh, untouched, but as he walked, he left no footprints behind. I stepped away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced for an explanation, but none made sense. Was it a trick of the light? Maybe the snow had already covered his tracks. But the snowfall had been slow, barely enough to hide anything that quickly. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, pressing it tightly to my ear. The line rang once, twice, then click. Silence. No operator, no background noise, just dead air. I pulled the phone away and stared at the screen. Full bars. No call failure. Just nothing. A deep unease settled in my stomach. I tried again. Same result. My fingers felt cold as I set the phone down. Then, another knock. I jolted, my pulse thudding in my ears. The same two deliberate raps against the wood. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned back to the door. The peephole was dark, covered. I took a shaky step back. Whoever was outside had placed something. His hand? His face? Over the peephole. A shadow loomed behind the glass, completely blocking my view of the porch. My throat tightened. "I know you're still there," the man's voice came again, muffled through the door. "You should have let me in." I felt ice creeping into my veins. The doorknob rattled. Just once, a slow testing shake, then silence. I waited, barely daring to breathe. Minutes passed. My knees felt weak, but I stayed frozen, listening. Then soft footsteps on the roof. I sucked in a breath. My body screamed at me to run, but I stayed put, staring up at the ceiling. The sound moved slowly, deliberately, from one side of the house to the other. He was up there. I backed away, heart hammering, and grabbed the nearest thing I could, a fireplace poker. The footsteps stopped directly above me. Then, nothing. The silence stretched. The only sound was the wind howling outside. I clenched my fists, waiting, every nerve on edge. And then finally, a whisper, crawling through the ceiling vents. "You should have opened the door." I had always prided myself on being a rational person, someone who didn't believe in the supernatural. I often traveled to remote locations, capturing the beauty of abandoned places. So when I heard about the old Holloway mansion on the outskirts of town, I couldn't resist the opportunity to photograph it. The mansion had been abandoned for decades, standing isolated at the end of a long, winding road. Locals whispered about strange occurrences and claimed it was haunted, but I dismissed these stories as mere folklore. Armed with my camera, I set out on a crisp autumn morning, determined to document the mansion's decaying beauty. Upon arrival, the mansion loomed before me, its once grand facade now overgrown with ivy and surrounded by dense woods. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. As I approached, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, with dust particles dancing in the shafts of light that pierced through the boarded-up windows. The wooden floorboards groaned under my weight as I moved from room to room, capturing the eerie stillness with my camera. Each click of the shutter echoed through the empty halls. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, I found a faded portrait of a family. A man, a woman, and their young daughter. Their eyes seemed to follow me, a trick of the light, I told myself. As I focused my lens on the painting, I heard a faint whisper. "Help us." I froze, heart pounding. The voice was barely audible, like a distant echo. I scanned the room, but I was alone. Shaking off the unease, I continued my work, attributing the sound to my imagination. As the day wore on, the light began to fade, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. I decided it was time to leave. As I made my way downstairs, I heard the whisper again, louder this time. "Please, help us." I spun around, but there was no one there. Panic set in, and I hurried toward the exit. Just as I reached the front door, it slammed shut before me. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Find us. Set us free." Desperate, I ran to a nearby window and smashed it with my camera. Climbing through, I cut my hand on the broken glass, but didn't care. I sprinted to my car, blood dripping from my fingers, and sped away, not daring to look back. Once I reached the safety of my apartment, I tried to make sense of what had happened. My logical mind struggled to find an explanation. I decided to report the incident to the local police, hoping they could shed some light on the matter. The next day, 2 officers accompanied me back to the mansion. As we entered, the air felt heavier, oppressive. I led them to the room with the portrait, but to my shock, it was gone. The walls were bare, with no sign that a painting had ever hung there. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, and I felt my credibility slipping away. Determined to prove I wasn't imagining things, I suggested we search the basement, a place I hadn't dared to explore alone. Reluctantly, they agreed. We descended the narrow staircase, the air growing colder with each step. In the dim light of our flashlights, we saw a series of old trunks and decaying furniture. In the corner, partially hidden beneath a tattered sheet, was the portrait. As we approached, the whispers returned, now audible to all of us. "Help us. Please." One of the officers reached out and touched the painting. Suddenly, the room filled with a blinding light, and the figures in the portrait began to move. The family turned their heads toward us, their eyes pleading, "Set us free." The light intensified, and we shielded our eyes. When it finally subsided, the portrait was empty. The family was gone. Shaken, we left the mansion and conducted a thorough investigation. Historical records revealed that the Holloway family had mysteriously disappeared in the late 1800s. Locals believed their spirits were trapped within the mansion, unable to move on. With this new evidence, the police decided to demolish the mansion, hoping to release whatever lingering spirits remained. As the wrecking ball struck the old walls, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. In the aftermath, the whispers ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The Holloway family was finally at peace, and I had captured the most haunting images of my career. Photographs that told a story of sorrow, entrapment, and ultimate liberation. I arrived at my family's cabin just as the snowstorm started picking up. The drive had been slow and tense, the roads barely visible beneath the thick blanket of white. I had planned this weekend getaway for some much-needed solitude. Just me, a few books, and the quiet hum of the fireplace. The cabin was just as I remembered it from childhood. Warm wooden walls, the faint scent of pine, and the comforting creak of the floorboards beneath my boots. I set my bags down and shook off the cold, rubbing my hands together as I turned on the heat. Then I noticed it. Hanging by the door was an old winter coat, thick, worn, covered in a thin layer of frost. It was dark brown with a fur-lined hood, the kind of coat that had seen decades of bitter winters. I frowned. I had been to this cabin dozens of times growing up, and I was sure I had never seen this coat before. My family only came here in the summer now, and no one had been here for months. Maybe Dad had left it behind years ago? Maybe it had always been there, tucked away in the closet, and someone had taken it out last time they visited. Shrugging it off, I turned away and made my way to the kitchen. I wanted nothing more than a hot cup of tea and a thick blanket to curl up in. By the time the storm reached full force, the wind howled through the trees, rattling against the windows like ghostly whispers. The cabin felt smaller in the dark, more isolated, the world outside erased by the swirling white abyss. I curled up on the couch with a book, the fire crackling beside me, when I heard it, a knock. Faint, soft, I froze. It had to be the wind, I reasoned. No one would be out in a storm like this. Then another knock, deliberate, too slow to be the wind. Heart hammering, I set my book down and stood up, my breath catching in my throat. The windows were too fogged up from the cold to see anything outside. I hesitated before moving toward the door. Maybe someone was stranded. Maybe they needed help. But when I reached the door and peered through the peephole, there was no one there, only the storm. I exhaled sharply, my nerves on edge. Probably just the cabin settling, I told myself. The wood expanding and shifting in the cold. That had to be it. Still, I double-checked the locks before backing away. The fire was warm, the blanket comforting. I told myself to forget about it. But then as I sat back down, something made my blood turn to ice. The coat, the old coat, the one that had been hanging by the door when I arrived. It was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the empty hook by the door, my mind racing. The coat had been right there when I walked in. I had seen it. I had even touched it. Now it was gone. A deep unease settled over me. I scanned the room, half expecting to see it lying somewhere. Maybe it had fallen. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But no. The coat wasn't on the floor. It wasn't on the couch or the table. It was just gone. I swallowed hard. forcing myself to think rationally. No one else is here. The doors are locked. The storm is too heavy for anyone to be outside. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Then I heard it. A slow creak from the hallway. I froze. The hallway led to the bedrooms, the part of the cabin I hadn't checked yet. I turned toward the noise, every muscle in my body tensed. The fire cast flickering shadows along the walls, and for a second I thought I saw movement in the dimly lit corridor. Someone was standing just beyond my view. I grabbed the fireplace poker with shaking hands and took a slow step forward. My breathing was too loud. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached the hallway entrance and peered in. Nothing. But then, a faint whisper. A voice so soft I could barely hear it. I wasn't alone. I took another step forward. The bedroom door at the end of the hall was slightly open now, though I didn't remember leaving it that way. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Then I saw it. In the darkness of the hallway, the coat was hanging on the doorknob. I hadn't put it there. My stomach turned. My grip tightened on the poker. I should have run. I should have called for help. But some terrible force kept me rooted in place, my eyes locked on that coat, my breath coming in short gasps. Then, the doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. The door creaked open an inch more. I ran. I bolted straight for the front door, my heart pounding against my ribs. My hands fumbled with the lock as the sound of footsteps came from behind me. Quick, heavy steps. Just as I threw the door open, I caught a glimpse of a shadowed figure standing in the hallway, inches from where I had just been. I didn't look back. I sprinted into the freezing night, the snow swallowing my footsteps. My car was buried under the storm, but I didn't care. I ran anyway, slipping and stumbling until I reached the road. By the time I found help, I was half frozen and barely coherent. The police arrived at the cabin within the hour, but they found nothing. No footprints inside, no coat, no sign of anyone ever being there. The only thing they did find, the bedroom door, wide open, with a single old-fashioned boot print in the dust just inside the doorway. The house had been empty for years, they told me. No one had lived there since the original owner, a reclusive man who always wore a thick, fur-lined coat, disappeared into a snowstorm decades ago. And he was never seen again. The gas station flickered into view like a dying ember against the endless stretch of snowy darkness. I had been driving for what felt like hours, lost somewhere along an empty highway, my phone's GPS failing me at every turn. The fuel gauge had dipped dangerously low, and the bitter wind howled outside, pushing me toward desperation. So when I saw the lone gas station standing against the storm, its neon open sign buzzing dimly, I let out a sigh of relief and pulled in. The place looked old, too old. The faded, rusted sign hanging above read, "Last stop before nowhere," which I assumed was some kind of gimmick. The parking lot was deserted, save for a single pickup truck parked near the side, its windows frosted over. The station itself was a small, weathered building with a single pump standing crookedly near the entrance, like a relic from another time. Snow swirled in small eddies around my feet as I stepped out of the car and into the freezing night. I grabbed the gas pump, but nothing happened when I pulled the trigger. No hum of the machine, no response at all. Great, I'd have to go inside. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in, and a wave of warmth hit me. The store smelled of old coffee and dust, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Rows of shelves stocked with snacks and random supplies stretched before me, and at the far end of the counter sat an old man. He looked ancient, his face a map of deep wrinkles, his hair white as the snow outside. He wore a thick brown jacket and a faded trucker hat, his pale blue eyes watching me the moment I stepped in. "Evenin'," he greeted, his voice hoarse but steady. "Cold one out there, huh?" "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing my hands together. Pump outside isn't working. He nodded slowly, as if he already knew. Gotta pay inside first. System's old. Can't trust cards out here. I dug into my pocket and pulled out a few bills, sliding them across the counter. The old man took them without looking, his gaze still locked on me, like he was studying my face for something. "You traveling alone?" he asked casually. The question made me pause. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." He hummed at that, a low, thoughtful sound. "You came down the highway, right?" I frowned. "Yeah, why?" "Just askin'," he said, a small, almost knowing smile creeping onto his face. "Folks don't usually come this way twice." I didn't like the way he said that. Something about his tone made the hairs on my neck rise. I shrugged it off and grabbed a cup of coffee from the self-serve station while he rang up the gas. The coffee was stale, bitter, but it was warm. I was about to turn back toward the door when I noticed something that made my breath catch. Through the fogged-up glass of the station's window, I looked toward the parking lot, toward where my car should have been. But it was gone. Nothing but fresh snow and tire tracks remained. I turned sharply to the old man, my pulse hammering. "Where's my car?" He just smiled, slow and eerie, tapping his fingers on the counter. "You've already been here before." A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down my spine. I took a step back from the counter, my eyes darting around the store as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. "What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. The old man just kept smiling, his fingers still drumming that slow, rhythmic beat against the counter. "You don't remember, do you?" I shook my head, trying to piece together what was happening. "I've never been here before." He let out a low chuckle. "That's what you said last time." My breathing quickened. This had to be a joke, some weird prank, but the sheer certainty in his eyes told me otherwise. I reached for my phone, but when I pulled it out, the screen was completely black. No response, no battery warning, nothing. I backed toward the door, gripping the handle and pulling hard. It didn't budge. Now, the old man murmured. "You don't want to go back out there just yet." "Let me out," I snapped, yanking the handle again, harder this time. The door still wouldn't move. The old man sighed, rubbing his forehead like a disappointed parent. "You left the road, son. You know what that means?" I shook my head, my stomach twisting into knots. "What the hell are you talking about?" He gestured toward the window. "Look outside." I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The snow was falling heavier now, thick flakes swirling like ash in the dim station lights. But beyond that, where the road should have been, there was nothing. Just an endless stretch of white. My breath hitched. Where's the highway?" The old man leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Ain't no highway left, not for you." Panic gripped me. I slammed my fist against the glass, but the sound was muffled, almost like the world outside had swallowed everything. "You never made it out of the storm," the old man continued. "You think you did. Every time you think you did. But the road ends here." I turned back to him, my head spinning. No, that's not possible." He sighed again, standing up from his stool. "Come on now, let's not do this again." Again. That word echoed in my mind, and suddenly, pieces of something, memories, began to surface. The snowstorm, the endless road, the gas station appearing in the distance, again and again. The old man nodded as he saw the recognition in my eyes. "That's right, you keep coming back, but this time maybe you'll remember before it's too late." The lights flickered and my vision blurred. My head spun as an overwhelming exhaustion washed over me, pulling me down into the dark, and then just like before, I was on the road again. The gas station flickered into view like a dying ember against the endless stretch of snowy darkness. The snowstorm had picked up, thick flakes falling in rapid waves, making it nearly impossible to see beyond the warehouse parking lot. I sighed, rubbing my arms for warmth as I adjusted the security monitors in front of me. The heater in the small security booth barely worked, and the hot coffee I had made earlier had already gone cold. It was going to be another long, lonely night shift. I leaned back in my chair and glanced out the window, my breath fogging up the glass. That's when I saw him. A man stood just outside the fence, barely visible through the swirling snow. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the building. The warehouse was in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town, and the roads were nearly impassable with the storm. No one should have been out there. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, the cold biting into my skin instantly. The wind howled, making my visibility even worse. I aimed the beam toward the fence. The man was gone. I scanned the area, searching for footprints in the snow, but there were none. The snow was untouched. I hurried back inside and locked the door. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the isolation and exhaustion were getting to me. I shook my head, sitting back down at the monitors, trying to focus on something else. Then, just as I exhaled, the motion detector alarm blared. I frantically checked the cameras, flipping through the different angles. Nothing. The parking lot was empty, the fence line untouched. But the alarm had only been triggered by movement. Something had to be out there. As I turned to the window again, he was standing right outside. His face was obscured by the frost-covered glass, but I could see the outline of his body. Tall, motionless, watching. Then in the eerie silence I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. I froze. The tapping was slow, deliberate, like he was testing my reaction. My breath caught in my throat as I forced myself to move, reaching for the radio clipped to my belt.
"This is security post,"
I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady.
"I have a possible intruder outside the booth."
Silence. The radio crackled, but no one responded. Of course, I was alone tonight. No backup, no one to call. The storm had knocked out cell service hours ago. I was completely on my own. The tapping stopped. I turned back to the window. He was gone. A gust of wind rattled the booth, and I jumped as the motion alarm blared again. My hands flew to the monitor, flipping through the feeds. Camera 3. The loading dock. The man was there. Closer now. He stood just beyond the floodlights, his form barely visible in the swirling snow. My stomach dropped as I noticed something in his hand. A keycard. My keycard. I patted my pocket. It was gone. The electronic lock beeped, the door unlocked. I shot up from my chair, slamming my weight against the door just as the handle began to turn.
No.
I shoved against it with everything I had, feeling a force press back from the other side. He was trying to get in. The lights flickered. The wind outside howled louder, almost deafening. I gritted my teeth, my boots slipping against the frozen floor as I held my ground. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The pressure vanished, the handle stilled. I didn't dare breathe. I waited. 5 seconds, 10. Then I forced myself to peek through the window. He was gone. The lot was empty again. No footprints, no movement, just the storm swallowing everything in white. I locked the door manually and backed away, my hands trembling. I kept checking the cameras, the window, the door, over and over again. But he never came back. By the time morning arrived, the storm had cleared, and the warehouse manager found me still locked inside the booth, gripping a flashlight like my life depended on it. I tried explaining what happened, but the cameras had recorded nothing. No man, no movement, not even my own panic. The only proof I had? My key card. It was found outside, half buried in the snow, right where he had been standing. I had been working the night shift at this gas station for months, but on nights like this, it felt like I was the only person left in the world. No cars had stopped for hours. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. and the fluorescent lights buzzed softly in the eerie silence. I leaned against the counter, staring at the clock as the minutes crawled by. Just as I was about to go check the back room, I caught movement outside in the corner of my eye. A man stood near pump number 2, completely still. I frowned. I hadn't heard a car pull up, and I was certain there hadn't been anyone outside just a second ago. He was wearing an old ragged coat, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. Snowflakes clung to his shoulders, but he didn't move to brush them off. He just stood there, staring at the gas station. I waited, expecting him to come inside to pay, but he didn't. The longer he stood there, motionless, the more unsettled I became. I grabbed the store phone and pretended to check something on the register, glancing up at him every few seconds. My gut told me something wasn't right. A gust of wind pushed against the glass door, and I nearly jumped when it creaked. I exhaled, shaking my head. I was letting the isolation get to me. I'd dealt with plenty of weird customers before. Drifters, truckers passing through, people too drunk to function. But this guy wasn't moving. Finally, I decided to do something. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside into the freezing night air. The cold cut through me instantly, but I ignored it, focusing on the man. "Hey," I called out. "You need help?" No response. I took a few cautious steps forward. "The pumps are self-service," I said, trying to sound casual. "If your card isn't working, you can pay inside." Still, nothing. The snow was falling hard now, the wind picking up. It howled between us, but the man remained completely still. Then, as I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were no footprints leading up to where he stood. A shiver ran down my spine. I turned back toward the store, instinctively stepping away. But when I glanced over my shoulder, my breath caught in my throat. He was closer. I hadn't seen him move. I hadn't even blinked. But he was definitely closer than before. I didn't wait. I turned and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. My heart pounded as I backed away from the entrance, watching him through the glass. He stood there for a long moment, still as ever. Then slowly his head tilted, just slightly, just enough to let me know he knew I was watching. Then, the gas station lights flickered, and when they came back on, he was gone. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and checked the security footage. I rewound the feed, pausing at the moment where I had seen him standing outside. He wasn't there. I played it again, fast-forwarded, then slowed it down. But no matter how many times I watched, the cameras showed only an empty parking lot, the snow falling undisturbed. I sat there, my body frozen in fear, because I knew what I had seen. And if the cameras hadn't picked him up, that meant he had never been there to begin with. Or worse, he still was. The wind howled outside, shaking the gas station's thin walls. My hands trembled as I set my phone down. The security footage showed nothing. No man, no movement, just the empty lot, stretching endlessly into the snowy darkness. But I knew what I saw. I tried to steady my breathing, my ears straining to hear past the humming refrigerators and flickering lights. Silence. Nothing but the wind. But somehow I could feel something, like a presence pressing against the edges of reality. Unseen but there. The door chime suddenly rang. I jumped so hard I nearly fell off my stool. My eyes snapped to the entrance. The door was still locked, but the sound had definitely gone off, clear as day. I swallowed hard and grabbed the baseball bat from under the counter. If this was some kind of prank, I wasn't going down easy. Slowly, I edged toward the door, peering through the glass. Nobody was there. Then, the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. The entire station was plunged into darkness. My breath hitched. The hum of the refrigerators faded, replaced by a suffocating silence. I clutched the bat tighter, my knuckles white. My phone. I fumbled in my pocket and turned on the flashlight. The weak beam barely cut through the dark, but it was enough to illuminate the counter and part of the store. Enough to see that I was still alone, or so I thought. A soft knock echoed through the store, not from the door, from inside. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs. The knock came again, slow and deliberate, from the back storage room. My flashlight shook as I lifted it toward the door. It was cracked open, revealing nothing but blackness beyond. I had locked that door earlier. I was sure of it. The knock came one last time, louder this time, closer. Then, a whisper. "You saw me." I ran. I didn't think. I bolted through the aisles, nearly knocking over the chip display. I fumbled for my keys, but my hands were shaking too hard. The knocking turned to scraping. Something was inside. I threw myself at the front door, unlocked it, and burst into the freezing night. Snow pelted my face, but I didn't stop running. I sprinted across the lot, slipping on ice, barely catching myself. When I dared to glance back, the gas station was dark and still. And then I saw him. Standing at the door, silhouetted against the dim glow of my flashlight, was the man. His head still tilted, watching me, smiling. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and tore out of the lot, my tires screeching against the ice. The gas station faded into the storm, and with it, the man. I quit my job the next morning. I never went back. But sometimes when I drive past that empty stretch of highway, I swear I see him, standing at the pumps, waiting, watching, and smiling. I was driving home from my sister's house, a late-night trip I was already regretting. The highway was bad enough in the snow, but the back roads were worse. No streetlights, no traffic, just endless stretches of frozen trees and the occasional mailbox peeking through the drifts. Then I saw them, headlights in my rearview mirror. I didn't remember passing anyone, and I hadn't seen another car in miles. But there they were, two bright white beams cutting through the snowfall, following me at a steady distance. At first, I felt a weird sense of relief. I wasn't completely alone out here. Then I noticed something strange. No matter how many turns I took, how fast or slow I went, the headlights never moved. They didn't get closer. They didn't fall back. They stayed exactly 2 car lengths behind me. I frowned, gripping the wheel a little tighter. Maybe they were just being cautious in the snow, keeping a safe distance. That made sense, right? I turned onto an even narrower road, one that led through a dense patch of forest. The headlights followed. I pressed the gas just a little. My car slid slightly, but I kept control. The headlights stayed right where they were. My stomach twisted. I slowed down. The headlights slowed down. I sped up. The headlights sped up. My pulse began to race. I reached for my phone, hands shaking. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Call someone? Tell them what exactly? That a car was following me? That wasn't illegal, but something about it was wrong. I needed to see who was behind me. At the next curve, I flicked on my turn signal and pulled onto the shoulder. My tires crunched against the icy road as I came to a stop. The headlights behind me flickered, then they went out. My breath caught in my throat. I stared into the mirror, my heart pounding. The road behind me was completely dark. No taillights, no silhouette of a car. I turned around in my seat, peering out the back window. There was nothing. The road was empty. No car, no headlights, nothing but snow. A chill ran down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the cold. Because there was one thing, just one thing, that didn't make sense. There were footprints in the snow behind my car, and they were coming toward me. My breath hitched as I stared at the footprints. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. And worse, they weren't just random tracks. They were deep, deliberate, leading straight from where the headlights had been, to my car. I fumbled for the lock button, slamming it down as if that flimsy barrier would keep me safe. My pulse pounded in my ears, loud enough to drown out the wind howling through the trees. I didn't see anyone. The road was empty. But I felt something, that horrible sensation of being watched, the kind that prickles up your spine like icy fingers. I forced myself to look around. Nothing in the mirror, nothing out the window. Nothing but darkness and snow. And then, tap, tap, tap. A slow, deliberate knock against my driver's side window. I jumped so hard I nearly screamed. My shaking hands fumbled to turn the key in the ignition, but it was already running. I had never turned it off. I didn't want to look. I did not want to look. But I had to. I turned my head, heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. There was no one there. Just the glass. Just the snow. Just the faint imprint of a handprint smeared across the window. I lost it. I threw the car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. My tires spun for half a second before gripping the ice, launching me forward. The car fishtailed, but I didn't care. I just needed to go. My headlights cut through the storm, and I kept my eyes forward, refusing to check the mirrors. I didn't care where I was going, I just had to get away. But then, the headlights came back. They flicked on behind me, just as suddenly as they had disappeared. I let out a strangled gasp, knuckles turning white on the wheel. They were closer this time, much closer. I pressed the gas harder. My car skidded, tires slipping on the ice. I barely kept control as I sped down the road, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. But no matter how fast I drove, the headlights stayed right behind me. Then, just as I reached a turn that led back to the main road, they vanished. Gone. Just like that. I skidded onto the highway, barely slowing down. My heart was still racing, my hands still trembling. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I needed to get to a gas station, a rest stop, somewhere with people. A few miles down, I spotted a small diner with a neon open 24 hours sign flickering in the snow. I pulled into the lot, barely putting the car in park before stumbling out. The cold air burned my lungs, but I didn't care. I needed to be around someone. Inside, a bored-looking waitress glanced up from behind the counter. "You okay, Han?" she asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't. "Yeah, just long drive." I sat in a booth, hands still shaking as I wrapped them around a cup of coffee. I forced myself to calm down. Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on me. Maybe my exhaustion made me see things that weren't there. That's what I told myself. Until I glanced out the window and saw the handprint on the outside of my car window. The same one from before. And it was dripping, like something had been inside my car the whole time.